So let me present to you Air, File Not Found, a fairy tale by Gloria De Leon.
Thrice welcome, gentle mortals, to the land of fairy tale, where dreams come true and gainst all evil goodness ever will prevail. So settle back and listen to our story for tonight, a tale of mirth and mystery, the legend of Snow White. In ancient times, a king and queen in bliss reigned o'er their kingdom wide. But sad to say, upon the day their child was born, the poor queen died. In grief, the king shed bitter tears. His heart was filled with pain. Though he loved his child, still he vowed he'd never ever smile again. And yet at last his heartache passed. His eyes he mopped and dried. To give his child a mother, once again he took a bride. Her beauty quite exceptional ensnared him in a thrice. But little did the good king know, her wicked heart was cold as ice. With poison in his chalice, she then claimed the royal throne, and at her mercy young Snow White was left, alas, alone. Now join us in Sylvania, where the characters await, to show you all what happens next and how the princess met her fate. So when I was in 8th grade, my class did a performance of Snow White, and I was the fairy narrator. It was a stupid kids show. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything. But that was my opening monologue, and yes, I still remember it word for word. Not because I have a particularly good memory, but because for many, many years, that was the only memory of junior high that I allowed myself to keep. Now, you don't know me very well. Well, some of you do. But I'm a very chatty person. I like to talk a lot, and there are very few subjects I'm shy about. However, there are 3 years of my life that I don't talk about, and that's junior high. Now, to put your mind at ease, and to clarify, nothing terrible happened to me. I wasn't kidnapped. I was never in any physical danger. In fact, when I heard that the topic for tonight was junior high, my first reaction was, oh, I'm not gonna have anything to say. Nothing happened. It was 3 boring years. Because for decades, that's been my response. Nothing happened. It was 3 boring years. Let's talk about something else. What are you doing? Do you want to go for tacos? Let's have tacos. Because it's easier to dismiss boredom than it is to acknowledge sadness. Because it's easier for me to erase 3 years of my life than to acknowledge that I still don't know how to handle that 3 years of my childhood were spent in a very deep and consistent depression. Life is like a fairy tale sometimes. At least the beginning of my life was like the beginning of a fairy tale. This is me, a proud Barbara Webster Bobcat. I went to public school from kinder to 5th grade. This is my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Mears. And in middle school, my parents, who could not afford to send me to private school, decided to send me to private school. And this felt to me like a huge betrayal. That in spite of all of the good work I'd done in my first 6 years of public school, in spite of the good grades, the good behavior, the volunteer work, the multiple Student of the Year awards, not that I'm bragging, just kidding, I'm totally bragging. In spite of my good choices and friends, none of this mattered, and in spite of all that, my parents still didn't know me well enough to trust that I could continue to make good, smart choices. And it distanced us. I was resentful and angry with my parents for 3 years. They thought that in private school I would have better opportunities, but I did not. Unfortunately, I missed out on a lot of opportunities that would have been available to me at the public school. I missed out on trips, extracurricular activities, dances, art, music, friends, fun, all of the things that make you want to get up in the morning. All of that was taken away from me, and I didn't feel that I deserved it because I had worked so hard to prove that I was going somewhere, and yet here I was, stuck, trapped. When people would ask me where I went to school, I would say, prison, which annoyed my parents, so I said it a lot. My parents felt that the private school would offer me better choices of friends. They were concerned about me, but the public school at the time had about 1,100 students enrolled in grades 6th through 8th. And sure, some of them were probably terrible people, but in any group of 1,100 people, there's got to be some pretty awesome, amazing people, and I wish I would have had the chance to get to know them. Instead, I had my choice of about 15 other angsty, hostile, caged-up little monsters like me. So I made a friend, Elizabeth. Thank God for Elizabeth. Now, like I said, I don't like this time of my life, so I also don't have a lot of pictures. So this is Elizabeth. Elizabeth and I had a lot in common, but mostly we hung out because we were the only two chubby Mexicans, and it was just easier to stand up to bullies together. And, well, looking back, this may be where I started my habit of collecting chubby Mexican friends. Because the following year, we also adopted Alicia, a third chubby Mexican. That's Alicia and me and Liz, and then the other girls making stank face. Of course, I'd always known I was Mexican. I'd never felt any shame about this. Why would I? Being Mexican was something that I was born being. It wasn't something that I did. You don't fail into being Mexican because you flunked out of not being Mexican school. So I never felt any shame about this, but here I was in a place where being Mexican was used as an insult. It was the first time, though unfortunately not the last time, where people would use Spanish-sounding gibberish words to refer to me or to talk to me. And it hurt, because at 11 years old, my whole world, everyone that I loved and loved me back, was Mexican, and I didn't know how to defend all of them. But I'm stubborn, so Elizabeth and I would just talk in Spanish constantly, anytime any of our classmates were around, even though when no one was around, we actually preferred speaking in English. As I mentioned earlier, we could not afford the private school. However, the school had a system where parents who couldn't afford full tuition could pay a partial tuition, and then the remaining balance would be paid off in volunteer work at the school, which created a situation where everyone on campus knew who were the families who could not afford full tuition. Now, again, I'd always known I was poor, had no shame about it, but here I was in a place where I was seeing kids my own age treating these adult volunteers like 1950s servants and treating their classmates like we were children of the help. Now, the staff members at the school were slightly more subtle in their discrimination, slightly. But I could see it in the way they spoke to my mom, in the often dismissive, but mostly just annoyed way they dealt with her, having just annoyed to have to deal with her and give her the time of day, which was vastly different to the all smiles and courteousness they showed to the parents of my other classmates, the full tuition parents. So I was in a situation where I was literally every day being told how I should be living my life according to the church, and yet surrounded by people who were living in a very opposite way. So I spent a lot of my time just feeling very frustrated and angry, and eventually just sad. Because as a kid, how do you change a world where people use money and church to hide their ugliness when there's so many of them and there's so little of you? So I shut down. I was tired of trying to fight against the world, so I stopped trying. But I still had to live in the world, so I stopped trying to be happy. I knew my parents couldn't afford to send me to the private high school, so I just had to wait. I didn't have to be happy. I just needed to survive. So I hid, and I did my best to just blend into the background. And I'm not a person who takes to blending into the background. But outwardly, I was very withdrawn and dismissive of everything. I didn't care about anything or anyone. But inwardly, I was constantly reminding myself of who I was, that I was not the situation I was in, that I was not the people that were around me, and that everything my parents had taught me about right versus wrong and kindness And church and God and respect, all of those things were still true, even if I couldn't see any of those things in this crazy upside-down world I'd been thrown into. And then, 2 years into my 3-year sentence, my fairy godmother finally decided to show up. She was different from all the other teachers. She actually smiled a lot. But she didn't just smile, she giggled. She was just so unapologetically fun and full of life. And when she talked to you, it was like she was actually listening. Like she actually cared what you had to say. Now, I like this Mrs. Matson, but I was not sold. And then one day, my mom came to pick me up, and Mrs. Matson started talking to her in Spanish. And I saw my mom's face light up. The joy of just being able to communicate. I love my mom, and I love people who are good to my mom. I'd always wanted to be involved in theater and to do plays, but in this sad gray cage where I found myself, my hopes and dreams kind of took a backseat to more important matters, like constantly convincing myself not to punch kids in the face, or convincing myself not to run away and take a nap on the train tracks. It's grim, I know, it's super grim, but that was my reality. That was life for me. So when Mrs. Matson announced that we were going to be doing a play, I came to life. I was still in this cage, but this was my world. I memorized that script front to back. I could have played any character. I don't know how she chose the characters, but she did it right. As the fairy narrator, I got to open and close that show. And as I was sitting there on opening night, standing there on stage in my older sister's prom dress, and my little sparkly twinkly lights I got at Disneyland, for the first time in 3 years, I felt like me. And I was lighter. And I was happy. And I'm not saying that I started liking my classmates, but I think I just forgot that I hated them. And then I kind of got the feeling they forgot they hated me too. There are so many bad memories that are wrapped up in this part of my life that when I graduated from 8th grade, I shut a door and I refused to look back. But I'm glad that I opened that door because I'm ready to recover those memories. The past couple of years have been very difficult for anyone who pays attention to the world around us, to the news, anyone who has interactions with other human beings. My countrymen have made some rather strange choices. And once again, I feel like I'm in this upside-down world where greed and money and prejudice and meanness and lack of respect are winning. But I'm not 11 years old anymore, and I'm not alone anymore. And I will not shut down, because I did learn something. I learned that through performance, I could get people to listen, and we need voices to stand up for what's right. I learned that when you take people's freedoms away, when you take away their right to joy and happiness, it breeds anger and resentment and hate. We can all be the oppressors at one point or another, but I remember what it's like to have everything taken away. And my experiences remind me how important it is to listen and to stand up for people who have lost so much more. It reminds me, I learned that we don't need to love everyone. In fact, I'm certain there are lots of people I cannot love. But if we refocus our energy, maybe we can just forget that we hate everyone. Because life is not a fairy tale where we get happily ever afters, but rather every day is an attempt at happiness. I came into my own in that show because I was cast in the role that I was born to play. So thank you, Letitia, for reminding me that I am the narrator, and that no matter how crazy the world gets around me, I have a voice, and I get to tell my story. Thank you.